just across the hallway behind the door that you came in through here as well. I want to welcome everybody here today. My name is Nancy Reed, and I am the Executive Director of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities Newfoundland and Labrador. Today, at least 30% of people over the age of 15 are persons with disabilities in this province. All candidates for this by-election agreed without hesitation to participate here today. We have many individuals here in the room with lived experience with disability, and many more joining us on virtual platforms of Zoom and through our YouTube channel. While this by-election, by its very nature, is specific to just a single district of the province, the issues that we will discuss today represent the realities of persons with disabilities throughout our province. At the Coalition, we address needs and advocate for systemic change on a provincial level. While a successful candidate in this by-election will represent the Conception Bay East Bell Island District, we can't lose sight of the fact that the successful candidate will, in their capacity, be a contributor to matters of importance on a provincial level. Thank you all, to the candidates, and to everybody in the room and virtually to join in this conversation today. We are very fortunate to have Marie Ryan with us today. Marie will take on the role of moderator for this session. Many of you know Marie from her work as a partner with Goss Gilroy's Atlantic office. She has over 20 years' experience providing consulting services to all levels of government and in the not-for-profit sector, including extensive experience working with diverse and vulnerable populations. For more than 30 years, Marie has advocated for access and inclusion for persons with disabilities at regional, provincial, national, and international levels. She was also involved in municipal politics in the 1990s and in the 2000s. She is also an inductee into the Newfoundland and Labrador Volunteer Hall of Fame, as well as the Order of Newfoundland and Labrador. So I'm going to pass the mic to Marie's very capable hands and look forward to having this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. With that introduction, maybe I should be running. Good afternoon, everyone. So pleased you could all come. I echo Nancy's comments for everyone coming today. We're incredibly pleased that the candidates could join us, and I will be moderating the discussion over the next 90 minutes. I think what we have to remember is that for persons with disabilities, the issues we discuss are not political. It doesn't matter what party you are, it doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter what your demographic. Everyone and anyone, we are everywhere and we are everyone. So we hope that today's discussion will be illuminating for all of you as well as all of us. In terms of the order of activity, each of you will have 2 minutes to introduce yourselves. Sandra is your very intimidating timekeeper here. So when you have 30 seconds left, she will let you know, and when time is up, she will also let you know. I do not expect you to stop mid-sentence, but I do hope that you will respect the time because we do have time limits set. Following the introduction, we have questions to pose. For the purpose of the audience, we have let the candidates know the type of issue areas we would be discussing. I will ask that even if there are supporters in the audience, don't clap. The reason being, you'll be eating into their 2 minutes. We also hope that this will be very respectful. As I said a minute ago, people with disabilities, this is not political. And so we would hope that you just speak about your experience or what you believe. We're very interested in your thoughts and ideas. We will rotate who answers each question first, because the first answer is always the most challenging. It gives others time to think. Following the questions that we have already identified and prepared, if there is any time left, we will see if there's any questions in the audience. And we also received a few questions from others via email. So I'm going to start. Just in the order in which you appear, in terms of giving you 2 minutes to introduce yourself, and I will start by turning it over to Kim Churchill.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you to COD NL for organizing this important event. 16 months ago, in this very hotel, in fact, in this very room, I attended 9 days of testimony for a Human Rights Board of Inquiry, which ruled that my son Carter was discriminated against for years. Despite this, there was no officials from either the district or the department who were in positions of authority and influence who could have prevented the discrimination has ever been held accountable by Andrew Furey's government. The Liberal candidate frequently talks about compassion and trust. Let me tell you about my personal experience. In July of 2020, during the Liberal leadership campaign, Andrew Furey and the Liberal candidate came to my house upon my request to learn about the deficiencies in deaf education. I described in detail how deaf children in our province were being discriminated against, language deprived, socially isolated, and prevented from accessing curriculum. As we know, Andrew Furey became Premier, while the Liberal candidate became his special advisor. That day, I learned how the Liberals operate. They show up, so it looks like they have compassion, but once they're elected, a 5-year-old deaf child in a wheelchair isn't so much as an afterthought. They treated my family and my child like this, they can treat yours as well. During my human rights campaign, I invited all political parties to attend and hear what was happening. Not one member from the Liberals or Conservatives showed up. Jim Dinn attended without hesitation. My 6-year fight in Jim showing he truly cared is why I chose to run with the NDP. I want to be with a party that will stand up for equity and fight for what is fair. I believe we need a province where we work for everyone and not just a select few. Advocating and fighting for me is not a new concept. And as your MHA, I will hold government accountable, and do the same for you because I know how. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Tina Neary.
Hello. Thank you. I also would like to thank the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities for inviting me to participate in this Q&A session about the issues that are important to at least a third of the people in our province. The term disability encompasses a broad range of lived experiences, many very different from one another, but the common element from a public policy perspective is the need for inclusion. No matter what the disability, it should never be a barrier, but it is, even today. As the Executive Director of Inclusion Canada NL, I was a witness to discrimination, and I fought daily and continue to do so. We all agree that no one can be left behind. My career has been based on being an advocate, an activist, and a representative, standing up and fighting for people as a counselor, as a chair of the Municipal Mental Health Task Force, as an organizational trainer in crisis intervention, and now at the helm of Inclusion Canada NL, I've used my experience to fight to make a difference. My approach is like that of my predecessor, David Brazel, to listen, collaborate on solutions, and keep up the pressure until change happens. Brazel was proud to stand and fight alongside others with the Churchill family, while our government spent nearly $700,000 in court to avoid having to include a child with a disability in the classroom. We all agree that was wrong. More recently in November, Nancy Reid took a public stand by refusing to participate with the Premier in the International Day for Persons with Disabilities because the Premier had just brought forward legislation rolling back inclusion in terms of buildings accessibility. I am a fighter for people, and I always have been. I cannot watch people suffer in silence. I am here to be a voice for everyone. We fight most effectively when we fight together, combining our efforts, telling our stories. It's the same approach that drives our leader, Tony Wakeham, and the PC Party to make a difference. I am here today to listen and answer your questions and hear what you have to say about what you need from all of us to be doing next to bring about real change. I thank Nancy, my time is up, for waging these battles for 365 days of the year. We now need a loud, powerful, courageous voice, and that will be me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll now turn it over to Fred Hutton.
Thank you very much, Marie, and thank you, Nancy. for organizing this, and for all the members of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities for the invitation to talk about this. As you mentioned in your introduction, this is of a provincial scope, not just exclusive to the district of Conception Bay, East Bell Island, but of course it is. It's for every district and every person in Newfoundland and Labrador to listen and to understand the plight of persons with disabilities, to try to be as compassionate as possible, to continue. That is what I've tried to do through my entire life. As a journalist for more than 30 years, and as a news director and a manager of those organizations, I listened to folks like you and like Marie from 30 years ago. I'm using your first name because I've known you for a long time ago, and your time on council, and the work that you've done behind the scenes and very out front and public, to try to educate myself. Do I know everything about persons with disabilities? I certainly don't. Or do I know everything about the fishery or the economy? Even after covering these stories for 30 years, I don't. But what I have prided myself on is being compassionate, empathetic, trustworthy, fair. And I think my reputation speaks to that. About 3.5 years ago, I decided to leave my job in journalism that I loved, to work with somebody who has won a humanitarian award, somebody who is compassionate as a doctor and tries every day to treat each and every Newfoundlander and Labradorian the same. And that is what I will do. I'm here today more to learn about how we can do better as we move forward than to tell you what we've done in the past. I need to learn and listen, and I think everybody needs to do that. Every MHA, no matter where you sit, no matter what color is on the card that your sign during an election. So I thank you for your time today, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about this and listening, but also engaging in conversation.
Thank you. And finally, Daryl Harding.
Thank you very much. Very well said, Fred. I too am here to learn. My experience, my name is Daryl Harding, Daryl J. Harding. I use the J for my granddad. Since he died, I had him as my middle name, and I keep using him. In regards to who I am, I was lucky enough to spend over a decade working with David Brazel in his capacity as minister. I was his EA for transportation and works, but more importantly, with Service Newfoundland and Labrador, and I built up a good relationship at that time with Mrs. White, Kelly White, who was your representative at that time. I learned a lot from Kelly, and I, on a personal level, also have day-to-day experience, life experience with people with disabilities. I can't promise the moon, but what I can say is I'm practical. I went with the invitation from Nancy. I went back to do my research, like I'm sure we all did, and I went to look to see at the work that was being done for the last period of time. I went back to 2012, and all of the plans, and all of the letters, and all of the initiatives, and I stopped printing. I didn't have enough paper. Yet we're still in the same position for the most part. So I know we all have challenges. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a homeowner. We have to sit to the table sometimes and make tough decisions about how to move forward. No matter what you have to do, you'll never be alone, guys. I'll be there with you. And if I'm not the MHA, I'll still be there with you and do whatever I can to help. I'm interested in listening to you people today, expanding on my experiences and my knowledge, and that way I can only help more. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. As I said, we're going to give everyone an opportunity to be in that position of being first. And we did ask a number of questions, but I think it's really important in this room and for persons with disabilities to start with a very broad but important question about what does inclusion look like to you? So what does inclusion of persons with disabilities look like? And I'm going to start for this one with Tina.
What does inclusion look like to me? It looks like the opportunity for everyone to be involved, engaged, supported, represented. It's understanding that we all have a purpose and we all have a job to do, if you will, to ensure that individuals are feel like they can be in the same space as everybody else. It's especially difficult when it's hard enough to try to navigate our system without having a struggle, a challenge, a disability. I find throughout the number of years in my career, I've been an advocate, as most people know, and I believe that there's too much talk, not enough action. There's an understanding with language that, oh yes, we're being inclusive, and we're being diverse, and we're being equitable. But at the end of the day, it really does just become language. It's not actioned appropriately. It's clear from the people in this room today and those I've encountered over my career that everybody wants to be included. Everybody wants to have a say. Too many people sit in silence with their struggles because they feel like they're not listened to, because they feel like even if they bring forward their concerns, nothing's going to change. We've seen that here. We've seen that with Nancy Reid and her efforts with the Coalition of Disabilities, that there are many things need to change, many things need to happen. But it doesn't seem to take place, and it appears like no one is listening. So individuals just need to feel like regardless of their issue, regardless of their struggles, regardless of their disability, there's a place for them everywhere with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just for your own knowledge, if one person starts, we're just going to move to the next person. So Fred, I pose the same question to you. What does inclusion look like to you?
Inclusion for me would look like not having to have a forum like this anymore. But the reality is that there will always be room for improvement. There have been recent changes to certain aspects of legislation. Did it go far enough? That will likely come up today. Perhaps not. But there's always room to discuss further where we are and how we can make things better. I mentioned, I sort of got sidetracked in my intro, as a manager of news organizations when I was in that role, in my previous role. There is an expectation, but also you have to do stories, certain stories that represent all aspects of society. Persons with disabilities, one of them. And it's incumbent on us, when we were reporters, to do a certain percentage of stories that would be representative of persons with disabilities. In this case, this is the audience that I'm speaking to now, and you've organized this forum. Somebody asked me why I left journalism, went into politics in that kind of a role behind the scenes as an advisor, and now moving to this role. And it was when a reporter who I had actually worked with asked me on the night of the launch, you know, is there a big difference? How does it feel? Well, obviously you're standing on one side of the camera instead of the other. But there's so many parallels to what an MHA and a reporter can do. And the example that I always give is that when your life is going okay and everything's perfect, you are not phoning a reporter and you are not phoning your MHA. You're phoning those people for help. And I'd like to think that in my previous career, I did that many times to help shine light on stories where there was inequities or something was wrong with it, be it with persons with disabilities or anything else. Similarly in my current job, when you have to deal with the public and try to help them. That's what I plan to do as an MHA.
Thank you. And Daryl, for you, what does inclusion look like?
To me, inclusion is very similar to my two colleagues here, but a little different as well. An inclusive society is one that provides the same supports for happiness and contentment and good mental health for everyone. Housing issues are the same for everybody. Challenges are faced the same as everybody. When it comes down to theory and paper, there are no dollar signs that should determine inclusivity for everybody. There's an old saying that says, they came for the coloreds and I said nothing. They came for certain religions, I said nothing. And when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. Not in my world. This is a time when everybody should come together to make society inclusive, whether you're 5 or 105. Transportation issues, every issue, to lead to a person's happiness and their contentment and their ability to work without the stress and strain that people are facing every day. And if that means having to take it from the bureaucrats' hands and put it in the government's hands to enact, then we have to have the political will to do that. And I don't mean political by color. I mean collaboration, open conversation, including the people that are facing the challenges, and those solutions that come around, boys, just do it. Just do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to turn to some of the issue areas which are identified. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking this way.
worries,
Kim,
no worries.
go right ahead. I'm sorry.
No worries, no problem. Thanks, Daryl. So when I think of inclusion, it means for me, no one being left behind. Never, ever worrying about not being included. Every person matters, and when government creates advisory committees, we need people at the table who are impacted and affected. We need to ensure that they're part of the discussion to help government with advising these matters and reviewing the recommendations. Each person has different needs and different abilities, and like all individuals, hold tremendous potential. However, for persons with disabilities, removing barriers is the difference between knowing that potential exists and living out that potential. There are few experiences more empowering than seeing ourselves live up to our potential, and making that experience of empowerment possible for persons with disabilities creates an opportunity to define a new model for our society. By removing barriers and fostering inclusivity, we change the narrative. There is no one-size-that-fits-all solution to inclusivity. In order to contribute to this, we must all participate in identifying, removing, and preventing barriers. We must all join this conversation and keep it going. And as your AMHA, I can promise that I will always wear an inclusive lens with each decision I make with the NDP caucus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My apologies again. So one of the issues that we referenced to the candidates was around definition of disability. And I want to just give a couple of seconds on the issue and then speak about it a little more broadly. So it was referenced earlier, there's been an ongoing issue regarding the definition of persons with disabilities used in current provincial legislation. Recent amendments to the Building Accessibility Act exclude persons with disabilities except those with physical, mobility, vision and/or hearing disabilities. This has been publicly raised as exclusionary and regressive. It's magnified by the fact that consultations with the community identified the importance of an all-encompassing definition. So the question that I pose is, arising from that experience, how do we ensure that going forward, the government not only consults with the community of persons with disabilities and its representatives, but reflects the expertise? In other words, how do we ensure that our expertise is given the respect it deserves going forward? And I'm going to start with Fred.
Thank you very much for the question. Appreciate it. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of today's forum, I'm here to learn as much as I am to talk about the past or talk about some of the movement that's taken place in recent months. There's a lot of paper here in front of me that describes certain things related to what you were talking about, the definition, the UN definition, some of the things that the current administration has done. I think it just involves continuing to talk, but continuing to have that open dialogue, to listen and to learn. And as I said in the beginning, for me, even though I've been around the province and covered countless stories over the years of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities, either through the coalition or just individual stories of people, and chatting with them in my more recent role within the Premier's office. Just to continue that conversation, to learn more, and to say, how can we push it farther? Legislation can change, it did change, and we can change it more. Just by continuing to talk, having those relationships. Everybody in this room, I think, and everybody up on this, in the front of the room here, there's not a person in here who wouldn't want to see a perfect world. How do we attain it? Well, we do it by having good relationships, continuing to talk, your folks with your organization continuing to fight and advocate. And I mean, as a person who, thank you, as a person who has covered countless stories related to persons with disabilities and dealt with it from within the office I'm in now, not quite as many, but certainly have done some exposure, just to continue to talk. And sometimes you just need to listen, and the answers are there, you just have to find them.
Daryl, same question posed to you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. From time to time, I'm going to have to stand, not for positioning, but because I'm recovering from a car accident, and sitting down is not always a good thing. For everyone that asks the question of a definition of what a disabled person is, there are several. Human Rights has one. CCD has one. We have one. The provincial government has one. But most importantly, what I feel is the best thing to do to move forward based on the definition or who is disabled or what to do, I would use the model that my municipality, that I'm so blessed to be serving a councillor on, has done. They created an advisory committee where we accept those people and their expertise that we would never be able to afford as a municipality in areas like heritage, the arts, the environment. I see no different here. I think that if we had an organization like COD NL formulated a citizens advisory board where you would advise the government, maybe we could relax the yoke of governing and final decision-making that the government holds and have it include the expertise of the people involved in that area. Thank you. There's no weakness in accepting the fact that we don't know everything. And governments need to understand that. First, they have to be reminded of that. There's no weakness in having a plan B in case plan A doesn't work. But unless you get the information and the data to properly make decisions moving forward, you're going to end up getting stuck in the mud and not making the right decisions. So I think that if we had an advisory board for people with disabilities that the government would accept as the experts to help them, advise them, it would go a long ways.
Okay,
Thank you.
Kim?
Thank you. You mentioned a couple things in your question there, the Building Accessibility Act amendments as well as the definition for persons with disability. The NDP was hopeful that the amendments to the Building Accessibility Act would mean improvements, and I have a personal investment in that as my son has a disability, is in a wheelchair, and so physical barriers have been an issue for us for many, many years. And certainly to the many people whose daily lives are impacted with reduced mobility, and other complex needs. It was obvious what needed to happen, so it was very disappointing when we saw the changes that were made were actually a reduction and caused more challenges for people with different abilities. I'm also very troubled and deeply concerned with the implications that are left with the move by changing the definition for persons with disabilities. Doesn't mean that these groups who, say, may have dyslexia will no longer be eligible for supports from provincial government. What does it mean for supports offered or paid to individuals with these types of disabilities? Is their eligibility now up in the air? And here we see again that this government doesn't see people with disabilities as a priority. They treat families like ours as a nuisance, getting in the way, and want to narrow the focus of the support they need to provide, leaving people in need of these supports to fend for themselves. So when it comes to what we need to do, this government needs to understand that people with disabilities are just as much a part of this community as anyone else. And as your MHA, I will be pushing for answers for these specific questions I mentioned earlier. But I think the most important thing that government needs to do is they need to rethink this misguided information or definition altogether. But what is most important is they need to sit down at the table, face to face, with the very people that are impacted and affected by this decision and this choice that they made, and explain why they're doing this. I want those responsible in government to listen to how this decision will change the lives of the people that it is affected by.
Thank you, Kim. And this last question, the same question, and the last candidate for this question is Tina.
Thank you. It's really difficult to take everything that's in my mind right now and put that into 2 minutes, but I will do my best. The first thing, and I believe I've got the understanding of the question right, the first thing I want to mention is that while I have spent my career involved in this, with this topic, if you will, when we look at disability relative to physical, emotional, mental, it's all very valid, but I'm only an advocate. I am not the expert. The people around us who are experiencing what we're talking about are the experts. And I don't understand how we can do anything, make any regulations, go through any process without ensuring that we consult with those who are very aware of what it is that we need to do. So from my end, I wouldn't make any decisions without ensuring that the people that can help me with that, so that I can go back and go to the House and speak on their behalf, my information comes from you. So that's first and foremost. I also want to just mention my colleague over there, who I'm also municipal, that's a tough word, municipal councillor. We do actually also have an inclusion group in our town. It is not an advisory group by any means, but it certainly does advise. And I think it's something that is absolutely necessary and imperative in every environment, in every municipality. The City of St. John's, I was honored to serve on their inclusion advisory committee. And the other piece that I want to mention as far as the definition, one of the things that I am happy to see is that we do have two pieces of legislation, one of them being the Building Accessibility Act and the other one being the Accessibility Act. And the Accessibility Act seems to be the stronger of the two, and it also takes precedence in their definition over the one that's been presented with the building piece. However, it needs to still change. There is time for amendments, and there is no more time for me to continue talking. I told you 2 minutes would be tough, but I would love to continue the conversation with people. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much. And I will acknowledge that these questions are challenging. It is hard sometimes to look at things differently when you have not perhaps had the same exposure. So I want to again reflect back on the recent amendments to the Building Accessibility Act, almost as challenging as municipal. Because if you were to speak to persons with disabilities, they would tell you that these are regressive in nature. So I know that we had talked about how would you enable public access in light of the recent amendments, but I think just drawing from the conversation we just had, I'm going to ask you, going forward, if you were successful and elected, How will you ensure that internally existing legislation is inclusive and that new legislation coming forward would be inclusive? So a minute ago we talked about how do you respect and reflect the perspectives of persons with disabilities from the outside. Now I'm asking what you're going to do when you're on the inside. What are you going to do about the current legislation in terms of whether or not it is already inclusive, and what we can do to ensure that future legislation also is? And I'm going to start with Darrell.
Thank you very much. It's a great question. First thing you have to do when looking to do anything internal is to include everybody at the table for conversation. Come up with an education program. Make sure that everybody understands what the goal is and the steps that we would take to reach that goal. Again, I will go back because I'm a strong advocate for advisory groups or a board of expertise. And in order to make the right decisions and have the right data, we would need representation from that community. Not only the community for disabled people, but also other communities of people that would be part of the new accessibility chapter in the legislation. The input that comes from others dictates the success of the outcome for all. And if we have the right input, if we have the right conversations, if we have someone to be proactive at the table with us, and when I say us, I mean government, if they're at the table, we're not reactionary later on saying, oh, we didn't do this, or this is regressive, you should have thought it this way. It's easily solved. All we have to do is envelop the people with the knowledge at the beginning. No one knows it all. It's not a weakness to say, I don't know, let's get an expert. And there are all different fields of experts, but in this particular subject matter right here, the experts are here in the room. And you guys organize a panel or whatever, however you do it, an advisory board, or that would be a great first step, to being proactive, to having an education program based on the input that we get from everybody, and then enacting it. Research it, follow up on it, make amendments to it, and it'll be a living, breathing document. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question posed to you, Kim, and again, I know, just so I can make sure everyone is clear, as I know, as you just restated the question, but you are correct, it's how do you address issues internally, like the legislation current proposed?
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share a little personal story first. Of course, having a child that is in a wheelchair comes with a host of challenges. And it wasn't uncommon for me over many, many years of having to lift my child up over multiple stairs to attend birthday parties and public events. And it was a situation that should never have happened. I was physically capable of doing it because he was much younger and lighter. We're at a point now in his life, I just simply can't do that anymore. And so because that has happened, it has literally cut us off from so many events that we as a family should be able to attend, and we haven't been able to. So yes, legislation has to change, and certainly many, many things are not working in our communities. And so, accessibility means different things, though, to different people. And accessibility is not just one single thing. The goal should be to create a barrier-free society where every individual, regardless of their ability, is able to fully participate in the world around them. And creating this means not only ensuring that buildings and roadways are safe and accessible for all to enjoy, it also means ensuring that we can communicate with each other. It's just as important, and we have to have accessibility, like things like signs, ads, videos, websites, that has clear communication materials that we absorb in everyday life by making the print that we produce clear, readable, and possible for readability, as well as including ASL and Braille, Communication and readability shouldn't be an afterthought, where oftentimes it is when producing materials. It should be the first step in making information accessible to everyone. That is the purpose of universal design. So as MHA, there's no reason why legislation intended to help those with disabilities cannot do that job. I will hold government to account and make sure that everyone's voices that are impacted by this are heard and reflected in the legislation.
Thank you.
And we will incorporate a universal design. Thank you.
Thank you. Tina.
Keep forgetting to use my mic. Thank you. So we take the external piece, which is having the conversation with the experts, and now we take that internally, and that's the purpose. As my motto is within my campaign, it's I'm a voice for everyone. And what that means is I'm the voice that will take what you have to say and bring it forward to the individuals that make the decisions. I think what's important is every person in the room, if anybody's ever sat and watched, members in the House of Assembly have conversations, everybody has their own specialty, if you will, their expert knowledge. And I'd like to think that with my background, that's something that I would be able to bring to the table. Everybody's doing a great job. The PC party certainly is, very supportive of everything that we're speaking about. But I think it's the opportunity to further educate and bring further awareness as to what it is that is happening and what the challenges are that people are experiencing in our communities. I have a personal story as well, and it's really about accessibility. My mom was a very active, wonderful, feisty woman she was, and she loves food. And years ago, she would love to go downtown St. John's and engage in restaurants and different types of cuisine. And now she is in a wheelchair, and there is no ability for her to do that in most of those areas. So I think we have to have those conversations. It certainly doesn't do a whole lot for one's, confidence, if you will, when they're trying to go into a restaurant and they've got people hauling them in their wheelchair up over the stairs for everybody to see. It's an embarrassing situation. So we look at, from an internal perspective, decisions are made. We know that Bill 52 was there. There's slight changes that have been made, but room for by far more changes and amendments to occur as we move forward. So I would ensure internally that that education is shared and that those amendments take place. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final candidate for this question, Fred.
Thank you, Marie. In June of 2022, the minister responsible for the status of persons with disabilities established the Accessibility Standards Advisory Board, which consists of 8 members. And all of those members were at the time and are advocates of issues importance with the disability community. Persons with disabilities community, sorry. And they will help identify, prevent, and remove barriers to accessibility and inclusion throughout the province. So what does that mean? It basically means the same thing that I did as a reporter for many years. If you have to do a report on something, whatever field it is, whatever aspect of life, whatever story it is, you find an expert. You find somebody who can speak about it, somebody who has lived experience, which is a more recent term, somebody who lives that life every day as a person with a disability, in this case, obviously. I was thinking that, and listening to the 2 councillors who are up here from Portugal Cove, St. Phillips. Now, obviously, this district involves more than just Portugal Cove, St. Phillips. It's also a large portion of Paradise, about 4,300 people, and then the entire population of Bell Island. Why couldn't we go a little bit wider with that from a district perspective, and as an MHA, have our own group where you meet once a month or you meet every couple of weeks or whatever it is, people from the community who can, because I would be a voice for Conception Bay East Bell Island, but that voice then goes in where decisions are made on possible changes to legislation, making life more inclusive and accessible for all residents of Newfoundland and Labrador. And like I would have done as a reporter, listen to people, and instead of doing a report on it or writing a story for a web or for radio, bringing it back and taking that information as something that requires change or moving something forward beyond the legislation that's there to change it. It can be changed.
Thank you. So now we're going to turn to something a little more concrete, accessible and affordable housing. So clearly, it is in the media. It is an overarching, in some ways, an almost intractable issue faced by people of this province, access to affordable, suitable housing. The issue of access is more complex for persons with disabilities for many reasons, not the least of which is that housing is very much a private sector endeavor. What steps could you take to improve persons with disabilities' access to suitable, affordable, accessible housing across the province, especially in more rural and remote areas? And we're going to start this one with Kim.
Thank you. So 22% of all Canadians live with a disability, but make up 41% of those who live in poverty. This province currently offers no form of disability financial assistance. We're all living through a cost of living crisis, just to name one of many crises, and it have many expenses like groceries, utilities, and people are barely keeping their heads above water. Families of people with disabilities are making difficult choices to make their homes accessible while many others go without, adding more challenges to their day-to-day lives. And it shouldn't be this way in 2024. In 2011, the Home Modification Program was created by NL Housing as a spin-off of the Provincial Home Repair Program. However, successive governments, both Liberal and Conservatives, didn't consider people with disabilities a priority, and the amount of funding and the income cutoff have changed little since their inception. They just expect all of us to do more with less. So that's why I am favoring an increasing funding to this program, not only to ensure that everyone, regardless of where they live in this province, who needs it, can avail of it, but also make up for years of costs going up. Bring the funding to where it needs to be and tie it into the inflation. I will also push to ensure that any renovations or new builds by NL Housing are done in accordance with the principles of accessibility and universal design in mind. So many of our publicly owned units that are currently inaccessible, and we will have to act quickly because considering our increasing senior population, the demand for such units is going to skyrocket in the next decade. Thank you.
Tina?
We can travel anywhere and have somebody give us opportunity for accessibility. You go on the ferry, Marine Atlantic, and there are accessible rooms. You go to hotels, and there are accessible rooms. However, it's not something that why is there just opportunity to have, okay, yes, you can have this room or you can have the accessible room? That makes absolutely no sense to me. Everybody within the disability community has some form of language, whether it's the ability to use sign language, whether it's the ability to speak verbally, whether it's written format, whatever the case is, everybody has a way to communicate. And so why is it that they're not being consulted with in everything that happens? In the concept of NL Housing and their building, you know, we're talking about whether it's 11 units or 750 units. The point is, they should all be built with accessibility, not just one or two here, over here, and one or two. Like, at the end of the day, restaurants, public spaces, homes, right from the get-go, all should be accessible to everybody with all of their needs, whatever that might be. We talk about no one being left behind. Quite frankly, I speak from my heart and not as a professional. Everyone is being left behind regardless. You're being left behind if you don't have a disability because you don't have the education to recognize and understand what is necessary in these communities. So absolutely, we can do better. We will do better, and we can only do so by ensuring that we listen to each and every person in this room and each and every person in our community, in our province, whatever that means. Start listening. Start paying attention to what's happening around us, because as I sit here, it's not known what tomorrow brings for me. And if I may ever be in a situation where I may require some of these services. So, thank you.
And over to you, Fred.
Thank you. From a Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corporation perspective, most people may live in St. John's, I guess, I'm assuming, or just areas close to St. John's, where there are housing units. Most of them are between 40 and 60 years old, the bulk of them. There have been new builds, but they're older. So there's the possibility now, if somebody's needs change and they're in there, Newfoundland and Labrador Housing looks at that and they will adapt. Newfoundland and Labrador Housing has actually committed to just over 10% of all new builds which will be fully accessible using the universal design. That is a commitment. They have committed to that. Since 2021, just to briefly go over some numbers, Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corporation constructed 27 units. All have the universal design features and include about 48% of those which are fully wheelchair accessible. An additional 48 units are under construction, soon to start, and all have that universal design. Within the next year, another 40 units with universal design features are going to be created, and again, there is that 10%, which they have committed to. In total, units completed or underway or planned will see the creation of about 115 new units with those universal design features, which have been adopted by Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corporation. There's a housing situation, crisis if you want to call it that, for many people. The cost of owning a house, the interest rates, and the cost of everything else. I know, I own a house, I'm lucky enough to. Well, I'm still paying for it, and I buy groceries. I know the cost of everything has gone up. There's a lot to deal with. But again, if we work together and get the advice from experts and folks with lived experience, persons with disabilities, specifically for this topic today, this forum and panel, we can make it better.
Darryl.
Thank you. Something that we're not hearing, which I will use right now as I lead up to my answer to this question, something that we're not hearing from any of the major parties, especially not the government right now, is the 2023 budget was based on oil being $86 a barrel. With the political climate around the world, oil for the last year has been north of $140 to $150, sometimes $158 a barrel. TD Bank, their financial experts said that for every $1 of an increase of a barrel of crude oil, it generates $16 million for Newfoundland and Labrador. So if you do the math on that, it comes out to pretty close to $1 billion of added revenue that we got that we weren't looking for. So in regards to affordable, accessible housing, I think we should have a universal allowance. Not only that, what I mean by that, first of all, is that anyone who needs financial assistance to get in an affordable, accessible building or affordable, accessible home, it should be awarded to them. What that number would be, again, would come through the data collection process. The town of Pooch Cove just approved a development with a developer where the town of Pooch Cove said, you can put in your 55 homes, but we want at least 10% affordable and accessible. What a wonderful idea. Newfoundland and Labrador Housing is one, and Marie, you were right. It's private industry driven in regards to homes. Municipalities, however, set the regulation zones for building of every subdivision that's going in every municipality here, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. So if we get a buy-in with the municipalities to make every new subdivision at least 10% accessible and affordable, that's a great first step. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next topic, establishment of a disability advocate. So In recent mandate letters, not just the current minister, the previous and prior, it was identified that work was needed to continue toward establishment of a disability advocate for persons with disabilities in the province. I'm not going to ask you if you support the idea, because clearly what else would you say in a room where we're talking about people with disabilities? But what I'd like to know is, assuming this position comes to fruition, which is our expectation, how would you ensure that this position is most responsive to both individual and systemic issues, so issues which are within systems? So assuming we get the position, which is our expectation, how do you ensure that it upholds and does what needs to be done to respond to individual issues and systemic issues for persons with disabilities? And I believe I'm starting with Tina.
Well, this isn't going to be a really complex, long-winded response, because to me it's very similar to everything else that you've asked, and it's bothersome that I can say this with such ease, yet it's not happening. And that is, talk to the people that know. If we have an inclusion when we have an inclusion advocate, because it is necessary and of course fully supported, there needs to be an understanding of what those systemic issues are. I can sit all day long and tell you what I think they are and what I have observed and what people have told me, but now we're going to, when we're looking at it from a systemic perspective, we're going to the larger group. So it's not just about my thoughts and what you share with me, but it's how do we find those issues and share it with those that matter. So an inclusion advocate would do exactly that. Advocate on behalf of persons with disabilities to ensure that what is happening is conducive to what the needs are. I look forward to when that happens. It has always puzzled me why it doesn't already exist. Again, what we're talking about is fair share for everybody. It's that simple. We have a seniors advocate. We have a children's advocate. We have an office of an advocate for almost everything. Disability sometimes just kind of gets tossed into these areas. Oh, let's throw disability in with the seniors advocate. But a senior with a disability, depending on what that is, could be very, very different than your 20-year-old or your 30-year-old. So it's, again, there's a lot that needs to happen. There's a lot of change that needs to occur. I strongly believe it can, and I intend to ensure that it will. Thank you.
Fred.
Thanks. As you all know, I'm sure that a review of the statutory offices was completed by Justice Fowler, and the report was delivered to Minister Hogan in late or early October, I think, of 2023, towards the end of last year. And there was a wide-ranging review of all those statutory offices. I know you said that we would all obviously agree that there should be a persons with disability advocate. I will state for the record that I agree with you. When you're representing 30% potentially of the population or more, obviously there would need to be somebody, a voice. So who is that person? Well, the advice from folks like you and from Nancy and from others, organizations and advocates, I mean, obviously you would need to have some sort of input into who would get hired. What does that job description look like? Is it a person who is already in a role like you, or you something like that? I mean, that would have to be discussed, obviously, but it needs to be somebody with lived experience, I think, and that person has to be that person would be the strong voice, as you see with other advocates, the seniors advocate or the child and youth advocate. Those are the people that the media go to and talk to, and those are the people that government and other MHAs, opposition and government or independent, speak to get advice, to learn, so that they can become more educated and bring that information to tables where decisions are made. So, I mean, the advice on who it has to be would have to come from organizations like COD NL and others who advocate for persons with disabilities.
Daryl.
Thank you. I'm going to stand again for a second. yes, of course, we all agree that you should have an advocate. However, I'm going to go one step further and hope that whoever the government is when this final decision is made hears me out. An advocate is only as powerful and successful as the power that they hold to be heard. Maybe we should be looking for the same power as the Commissioner for Privacy, where government doesn't tell him, he tells government. That's what we need. Not someone who can be ignored through whatever reasons the bureaucrats give, or partially heard, or an advocate's report that's shelved for a period of time, like the most recent one, which could 100% compliance could be 20 years down the road for the accessibility one. So I believe that when it's being structured, it should be structured in a way that it's 100% separated from government. It's 100% all-powerful in regards to its decisions to government. And like the commissioner, the privacy commissioner, doesn't report to government, doesn't suggest to government, directs the government. And I got 30 seconds left, but I'm done.
Thank you. Kim?
Thank you. You know, it's interesting, excuse me, during this past month or so that I have been knocking on doors in the district, I can't tell you how many families that I've spoke to that have actually brought this up and are crying out and begging for this position to be created, and I'm one. Last month in particular, I spoke with a woman who was advocating for a relative who has autism and is not oral. She was exhausted and frustrated with government. It seemed to have no interest in helping. She had heard about my story and she contacted me. She told me about an incident of abuse that was happening at a care facility, and she had reported it, but it was ignored. And despite multiple attempts to have this investigated, she was made to feel like her concerns were insignificant. As it stands, families like mine, hers, yours, and many of yours have nowhere to go to for help when we need it. Things like this shouldn't fall on families' shoulders, leaving them lying awake at night worried that the issue will never be taken seriously by government that doesn't seem to care. We did both agree on the importance of developing an independent, non-government oversight committee, such as a disability advocate, who would take on the concerns like hers and seriously take on those concerns and fight for better. An advocate would also be very useful in holding government to account to help make sure that the particular needs of people in the disability community are reflected across all new legislation and government policies. They could make their own suggestions after proper community consultations of areas where government could make policy improvements that would have a positive impact on people's quality of lives. And the only way that this is going to work for individual issues or systemic issues is that this person has to be somebody who has some authority and special powers that will compel government to act. As your MHA, I will lobby government to create that and ensure that.
Thank you, Kim. So at this point, we've finished with all the prepared areas of discussion. So we have a couple of more that we have received, but I certainly would like to offer the opportunity to anyone in the audience who may wish to ask a question. We do have someone with a mic. What I would ask is if you wish to ask a question, that you be brief. The candidates will all have an opportunity to respond. So please let me know. And we have someone in the back.
Sure. Okay, so just go ahead with the question. Okay. So many people with disabilities and complex medical needs require services from various health professionals, and everyone has the right to receive these services from publicly funded health professionals within a timely manner. And so the Association of Allied Health Professionals recently had to walk away from conciliation due to an unwillingness from government to address pay disparities that have continued to persist through successive governments. So what are you planning to do to help retain health professionals within the public sector, despite increasing pressures from the private sector for recruitment, to ensure citizens have access to the services they deserve?
And I will start with Fred, I believe.
Great, thank you. I'm assuming you're a member of the Allied Health Professionals. I have family members who are health professionals as well, work in the healthcare sector, and it's been a topic that we've been discussing in recent days since the situation with the contract talks, which I can't comment on because I'm not familiar enough with what's going on to do that. But I do know that within healthcare, obviously, the stresses and strains are showing greatly on those who work in the system. And I see it as well with people that I know, family and friends. We came through a very, very difficult period through COVID. And kudos to all those who had to work in the uncertain times. At the best of times, working in a hospital setting or healthcare setting is not, always it's a very stressful situation, we'll say, on a daily basis, and through COVID even more so. I think the provincial government more recently, though, has, in terms of trying to recruit doctors, trying to recruit nurses, physiotherapists, expanding the scope of practice for LPNs, NPs, and other professionals, occupational health and occupational therapists, physiotherapists, just the continuation of dialogue. I mean, separate from the contract talks that are ongoing, but just in terms of trying to keep more people in the healthcare system recognizing the stresses and strains they face. I mean, our Premier is somebody who worked in healthcare for many years, and one of the main reasons he left his job as a surgeon to come to government was to try to fix the healthcare system by establishing the health accord, I might add during the height of COVID, to look down the road. It's not going to get fixed overnight. If anybody up here says that they can do it overnight and fix it overnight, it's not going to happen. It's a 10-year plan, it's a 15-year plan, it's changing the mindset of people in the public what their expectation is, but also meeting the need that's there. Sorry, I'm out of time. We could talk about this a lot longer, I'm sure.
Thank you. Darrell?
Thank you, and thank you for that question. That's a very important question because one of the things we hear in the news a lot is about recruitment and retention of our health staff, of our health care people in all departments. One of the things about retention is for workers to feel like they are being treated fairly. And a way to do that was implemented by the government. It was called the JES, the Job Evaluation System. And it's done on scoring. So every position has a score based on different criteria. But what has happened in recent years with this scoring is that, well, let's take two jobs, and this is not meant to be personal for anybody, just two jobs that are scored as 981. That's the score. One job requires a bachelor's degree. The other job, which is also 981, requires a master's degree. But one job gets 20% less salary. So they went through the job evaluation system to get it fixed. And what they did is rather than take the job score from that comparable job, they took some of the aspects from that comparable job and some of the aspects from another comparable job and some of the aspects. So the system is broke. Either you're going to have a job evaluation system to get reevaluated and treat our healthcare workers with the respect that they deserve, or you're going to play silly little games like this and have people that care for our people out in the cold because they're forced to walk away because they're not being treated fairly. And that is the problem right now. We have to get that play gaming out, and we have to put our fairness and our respect for our healthcare workers back on the table.
Thank you very much. Kim?
Thank you for that question. Some people may know that, of course, if you have a child that has a disability, multiple actually, then we're going to use some allied health professionals in our lifetime. And in fact, out of the 29 professions, we use 19, and we continue to use a lot of those to this day. And we see the value, we see the significance, we know how highly skilled these individuals are. And I can't tell you what it does to me as a mother, most importantly, before everything, what it does to me on how this group of professionals have been treated in this system by government. We know that there's been a substantial number of healthcare workers that have actually resigned and have walked away. And really, can we blame them? If they're living and existing and working in the same healthcare crisis environment that we witness every day, why would they stay? So the issue is that, you know, we need to do what they've been asking for. We need to be able to treat them with the respect that they've been asking for. We need to listen to them. I am a big believer that, you know, people come to the table with solutions. The membership know what they need. The membership knows what their work entails, and they know what has to happen to help make the respect occur, to make sure that they are being listened to. Because when it comes down to respect, it's all about collaborating and bringing everyone to the table to make sure we're all involved and we all have our voices heard. And at the end of the day, we know that has not been happening. Thank you.
Tina?
Thank you. So, sure, I don't even know where to start with this one. Another one that frustrates me. I hear we can't fix it overnight, and absolutely, we can't. It should have never got to the point where it needs to be fixed. This is something that should have been recognized from the get-go if conversations were happening and these professionals were being respected. And respect isn't just about having a nice conversation and showing appreciation. Last night we were at an event and the street was full of these professionals who were looking for attention, who were looking for people to recognize that they needed support. They're not asking for a lot. They're asking for respect, equal pay. That's not difficult. But people don't seem to understand that. This is an area, as Kim mentioned, there's 25 different professionals involved. I guess people don't find it to be that important until they need it. And then once they need it, they want them to be able to respond. And that's not going to happen when they're not at the table. And it's very disappointing and very disheartening to know that this present Liberal government seem to have all the answers when somebody makes a comment about the fact that you've walked away from the table because you're not getting what you need, and what if we go on strike? And one of their ministers responds with the fact that, that's fine, we'll just find them somewhere else. They've already been through COVID. The economy is not great. The cost of living, we know, is an issue. And that stuff already affects each and every one of us. And now these individuals, these professionals, have to worry about what's going to happen to them tomorrow and to their families. Again, we need to listen by far more, and we need to pay attention, and we need to respond. And I wish nothing but the best for these professionals. We need them back at the table and being responded to.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to now take a question that was posed for those who are on Zoom. I'm going to read it. I am a member of the Board of Directors with CNIB and an eye care professional. During a meeting with government, and I'm not going to say who, but a meeting, it was said that blindness is a rare occurrence, therefore it's insignificant. How do you propose we invoke change for those with visual impairment when people on the inside of Confederation Building who are making decisions are uneducated? How would you address a change in the internal culture for decision makers so it improves the lives of those with visual impairments? And as the moderator, I'm going to take some license with that question. I'm going to say, how do you address a change in internal culture for decision makers so that it improves the lives of people with disabilities? And I think I'm starting with Fred.
Thank you.
Wait, now?
No, you
Gotta
started with
think?
Fred
No.
last time.
Daryl.
I appreciate it though, buddy. Well, it's ironic because the exact situation I was just speaking about is very similar to this. It's in that area. It's quite simple how you get that culture, that train of thought to say that blindness is insignificant. A, you removed a person, and if that's not possible, you get a person with disabilities advocate to be making these decisions, not a government official and not a bureaucrat. It angers me because I brought it up at the function last night. Because only 5%, a little less than 5% of the province are affected by blindness, it's deemed as insignificant. Why is it deemed as insignificant? Well, you know, we put so much money towards it, not as much as this disease, not as much as that disease. Well, these people live, they don't die from diabetes, they don't die from cancer, they don't die from heart attacks. They have a lifetime of this. So they're not insignificant. Anything but insignificant. The answer of how you change an internal culture in the concrete walls of Confederation Building from someone that says something like that is take the decision-making power away from them because they're not speaking smartly, they're tunnel vision, and they just don't get it. Simple as that. Now, I got about 30 seconds left, so I'm going to sing a Conway Twitty song. Go ahead.
Thank you. Kim.
Thank you to the individual that sent that question in. You know, once again, back to my own child, Carter was born premature, and so there was a host of issues when he was first brought into this world, a lot of complex, challenging medical problems, and one of them actually was his eyes. I brought him to the Janeway and requested that he be seen by a specialist there because I felt that there was something not quite right. I wasn't sure what it was, but all I knew was that his eyes were a bit turned. And so I guess people might say that the eyes were lazy eyes or whatever you want to put terminology on it. And so we seen a orthoptist. And this orthoptist actually did diagnose him with astigmatism, as well as the lazy eye. And we were given glass prescription, and we saw an ophthalmologist afterwards who did give us a prescription for glasses. But had it not been for this person who was literally the frontline individual in diagnosing, well, assessing, of course, diagnosing and treating Carter, I know that he would have had vision loss. He would have had sight loss. And we caught it so early, at 3 months old, that we were able to prevent that from happening. And I say we, but really it was the orthoptist that did that. And this is the significance of having these allied health workers. And you know, I've come out and I've had a public statement immediately telling them how much I did support everything they're doing, because I do believe that they shouldn't be in this fight. And so, you know, the issue of changing internal culture, I think it comes down to a few things. Sensitivity training. I've been saying that for many years when it comes to lots of different abilities and learning about different abilities. Education and awareness.
Thank you. And Tina?
Well, I feel like I'm going to completely mirror what Kimberly just said, because that is, I think, of the utmost in everything that we're talking about, and that is education. You know, if people don't know, if people don't understand, then people cannot respond. I always use the term that there's ignorance and ignorant. Ignorance is simply due to lack of knowledge. Ignorant is when you don't respond once the knowledge has been received. And I think that very often is what takes place. My son has autism, and he had the same issue that has been referred to here, that they referred to or called strabismus. If I hadn't have experienced that with my son, I would know nothing about that. And I wouldn't have come to learn all of the different challenges and barriers that come along with something like that. And you might think, that's just one little problem with their eyes. Give them some glasses. You might think, oh, that's just, one little problem with the way they walk. Just, give them a cane. Just, do something that is going to help them through that process. But do we actually understand what it means for them? So the internal culture can only be responsive if they understand. I don't think it's everyone's intention to be ignorant. But unfortunately, from what I see regularly, personally and professionally, I'm left with no other belief than if it's not something that somebody else is living through, then it doesn't matter to them. And I think that's completely unfair. I think people need to step up. I think people need to recognize and understand what it is that everybody within every community needs, regardless, blindness, hearing impaired, whatever the disability might be, they're there. And we need to be able to respond to all of them. I've just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry, but I think I'm almost at my time. See, there we go. I knew that's why. Thank you.
And now I'm right.
Thank you.
Fred.
So I think it goes without saying that kind of a statement, and I was going to say in this day and age, but at any point in time, would be unacceptable. And I would hope that it was a one-off kind of situation. I don't know if it was an official or frontline. I don't know enough about that to comment any more than to say that obviously if it's true, it's unacceptable. But I think it goes back to perhaps the need, as some of the other candidates up here have said, for more training. We look at things through all sorts of different lenses in government now to make sure there is inclusivity, that there is accessibility, be it the Indigenous community, persons with disability community, and there needs to be training. If people are going to be on the front line or going to meetings, there has to be more training. I'd like to think there isn't that culture, like that it's widespread within government, or within any organization for that matter. But again, more education, more advocacy, and an office of a persons with disabilities advocate would be that person to perhaps institute a training manual or some extra training or education for anybody who's hired by government and anybody who's in government now, working as a bureaucrat or in any provincial government office, to have to go through the mandatory training process, or even a manual, something. I'm not sure what's available there now, but I'd like to explore it a little bit more and think that it should be part of, if you're getting hired to do that, to deal with all aspects of society and all people, you need to know what you're talking about and know what's acceptable and unacceptable.
Thank you. We're getting near the end, but we're going to offer one more question. If the candidates can stay an extra 5 minutes, we're going to offer one more question, and I think it's Joanne MacDonald.
Thanks, Marie. I guess maybe I'm under the clock too, am I? 2 minutes? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I need to say to you that as a disability community, we gained a lot during the 70s and 80s in terms of moving forward. We've now lost a lot in recent years. One of the biggest mistakes the government ever made, as far as I'm concerned, was closing of school for the deaf. That was huge in my mind. But then things continued. We had a disability policy office that basically right now is completely ineffective, as I will say. We had a provincial advisory council on the inclusion of persons with disabilities, gone. We now have a government tweaking with the building accessibility legislation, making it less effective, changes to definitions. We have young people going through rehab, not going home to back to their communities and working. No, many are now going into long-term care. And the slippages that we're seeing are incredible. And lots of times I feel that what's coming at us from government is tokenism. We hear you, yes, we'll set up a committee, you put forward recommendations, we'll have a look at them, but they never implement. They don't listen now. That's a big concern. I just found out recently that there is no accessible transportation system across the island. Anybody living in Gander, Gambo, Deer Lake, whatever, cannot get on any kind of accessible transportation and get to St. John's. In 1981, going back a long way, the federal government made a commitment that there would be a road cruiser service across the island because our railways were gone. That commitment was there, 30 seconds. Provincial government took it over. They contracted it out to a private entity. Going on for quite a few years, it is now gone. So there's no accessible transportation across this island whatsoever. Those are just some of the small things that I know right now. I know there are a lot more. The disability community right now is very disillusioned, very disillusioned. And I don't know how we go forward, how we gain what we've lost, but we need to. Thank you. I wanted to ask about the transportation, specifically in terms of what can you do? If you are to be elected as MHAs, what could you do to reinforce or have the accessible transportation system brought into effect for everyone across the island that requires accessible transportation?
Thank you, Joanne. We'll start with Kim. And this will be the last response, and following this, we'll give you each a minute to just have some concluding remarks. Go ahead.
I'll start off by saying that, because of my experience, inclusion has been an illusion in government, in their view, and really there is a culture that has to be shifted, it has to be changed, and we have to work on that internally. With regards to accessible public transit, anybody with any different ability needs know how difficult it is to get around our province, and your comment about it not being available past St. John's is not surprising, because St. John's is literally the only place where you can find any kind of accessible transit, and even then, it's very, very limited. The province's dependence on automobiles means that travel within and between municipalities is becoming increasingly difficult for those, for one reason or another. Accessible taxis are hard to get, and usually you have to wait quite a considerable amount of time to find one. In addition, they are expensive. This government doesn't seem to be interested in supports outside of the metro area. And for years, they've ignored calls from NDP to invest in more accessible public transit in this province. They're not ready to do the hard work. The right thing to do is to work with all levels of government to develop regional, fully accessible public transit systems across the province, including the ferries, which will provide affordable access to work, education, stimulate the economy, and reduce congestion and pollution. As your MHA, I would bring interested parties together to see Metrobus service expand and get the needed resources from both the federal and provincial governments so that all members of the public, but especially those living with disabilities, had quality, reliable, accessible public transportation options. I would especially love to see investments in regional transit that would see the Metrobus Go bus expand geographically to at least offer some of the commuter service to neighboring communities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tina?
My son relies on others for transportation. At this point, he's not in a position where he can get his license. He's a young man that likes to still participate and go with his friends and engage in recreational activities. But the Go bus isn't even an option. We live in a rural area, and the Go bus doesn't come to us anymore. They used to, but they don't anymore. It was just something else that fell within the budget cuts. The cost now for him to go to work in town from Portugal Cove, St. Phillips, is about $810 a month. He is going to school, he is working, a minimum wage job. Of course, at this point, we are in a position where we have to support him and help him to be able to do this. But not everybody can do that. We know that. We have people that I spoke with somebody once who had a child with a disability, and when they were looking to get government supports, the individual, the social worker came out to the family and had a conversation and told this individual, why would you need supports? You have a car. That's a luxury item, right? How is that a luxury item? Just being able to get around. I spent some time, and I know this is happening in all of our rural areas, but if we go to Labrador, Happy Valley Goose Bay, I was there, I had a conversation one day with an individual, and they said, can I take you somewhere? And they took me to an individual's home. an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair who had left his home. He could count the times that he had left his home in a lifetime because there is zero accessible transportation in Labrador as a whole. There's not even an accessible taxi. They have nothing. Bring it back here to our area, I mean, it's a province as a whole, Newfoundland and Labrador. We need to be able to address, again, I could go on and on and on. I'd love people to continue conversations with us because this is just so important. So again, I thank you.
Thank you. Fred?
Joanne, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And I think it was probably a lot of the work that you had done through the 1970s and 80s and beyond for persons with disabilities that has advanced where we are today, changed the landscape, if you will. And I'm sorry to hear that you feel that we're not going in the right direction. You know, from the perspective of Conception Bay, East Bell Island, which is including part of Paradise, Portugal Cove, St. Phillips, and Bell Island, one of the things we talked about last night at a similar forum, but with a Chamber of Commerce, with the four of us here, is that the issues that people who live in our communities don't have access to public transportation. So it's difficult for people to come to the community to live or to work if they work somewhere else, because if they don't have a car, as many people don't, there's no option for them, so they don't bother even looking. Metrobus reported recently that their growth last year was 45%. They're looking at the data on why that's such a dramatic increase and how they can increase it. And as I suggested last night, what I'd like to see is Metrobus continue beyond the airport, maybe down through the Cove at least, just from the community I live in, and back up Thorburn Road out to the Avalon Mall as a run a couple of times a day to get people to and from work, or perhaps folks who need to get to work wherever it is. In terms of working with the province as an MHA to try to institute province-wide accessibility transportation, I think it's incumbent on us in 2024 to do that. And as an MHA, I'd be certainly willing to take your cues and your guidance and expertise on how we could do that, to meet with the people who provide the bus service, first of all, to see if there's a way. And there's taxi grants available. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars and grants for retrofitting taxis just here in St. John's or in the metro area or anywhere in the province. Whether or not people avail of it, it needs to be obviously more attractive so that they can. But I'd be willing to work with you and others on that to try to institute it.
And finally, Darrell.
The last shall be first. Thanks for that question. It's a great question. It's one that I raised in 2021 about accessible transportation across this province. At that time, the Liberal government introduced what was called a Canadian Infrastructure Fund. And part of that fund was a department called Active Transportation Fund of $400 million to provide transportation in Canada that is easier, safer, convenient, and more enjoyable. And I wrote them and said, what about accessible? Accessible was never, ever added. So the funds are there, and it takes what's the word that I'm going to use for politely, because I know what I would tell you in the parking lot. But sometimes it takes a kick in the pants for someone to actually do the work. Everybody likes to talk about it. Everybody got the word salad and the flash words, right? It takes gumption to start the work. So what I would do, to answer your question, ma'am, is I would introduce a private member's bill in the House of Assembly with the permission of all three parties to do a cross-the-board, non-partisan canvass to the Canadian government to say Newfoundland and Labrador was promised, when you took away our railroad, we were promised open transportation across this province. Now you've made it easier, safer, and enjoyable. Now make it accessible. And I got 30 seconds left, so this time I'll do Elvis.
Thank you very much. So while I know there are other questions, in the interest of everybody's time, especially the candidates who have come here today, what I'd like to do is offer you each 30 seconds to a minute, just very brief closing remarks, and then I will just give a brief remark, and we will turn it over to Nancy to conclude. So I'm going to start back where we started with Kim.
Thank you. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. No parent should ever have to fight for human rights like education. And no one should ever have to fight for accessibility or inclusion. Yet we see that happening in our province every day. And you've heard about all the other crises that we are living through: healthcare, housing, and affordability, made worse by a Liberal government that just doesn't seem to get it. If the Liberals were ready to do the hard work, people with disabilities would be living better lives. We would have more childcare spaces with care workers. We would have affordable, accessible housing, and you would be able to make ends meet. Too many years have been squandered. Unfortunately, fortunately last month, I had a great discussion with the town of Portugal Cove St. Phillips, who had a public consultation take place on making the town more accessible and more inclusive. Sadly, I was the only candidate that actually attended that event. I fought for my family and won, and as your MHA, I will do the same for you. If we want different outcomes, we have to make different choices. We need to make different choices, and that different choice is NDP.
Thank you, Kim. Tina.
I am a candidate for the Progressive Conservative Party. Progressive means people before politics. That is why I chose to affiliate myself with them, because that is something that I have been doing, is working with the people for all of my career. And one of the other things I want to make mention about is throughout this campaign, I've heard a lot of things that make me really angry, but I'm not allowed to respond. And it's lip service, saying this to get the vote. I've been doing this my whole career. I've been saying everything that I've been saying in the last 27 days for the last 20 years. So this is not lip service. I do intend to address all issues relative to inclusion, relative to persons with disabilities. That is what I do. And I look forward to being able to continue to do that and educate individuals in the House of Assembly very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fred.
Thank you. Once again, I want to thank Nancy and Marie and everybody tonight for organizing this event. It has been very informative and educational for me personally. That's what I said in the beginning, and I'm glad I participated. We could be here for much longer, I'm sure. I'll just leave you with this thought that, I have spent the last 30-odd years working in this province that I absolutely love and never want to leave, to try to make it a little bit better. As a reporter, I always said that, I'm reporting on the events and things that happen in the community around me as somebody who has to live here as well. And I'm sort of, I want the province to succeed. I want us to be better, which is why I left the role that I had before as a journalist and joined government, and somebody who I think has a good vision for the province, who is compassionate, who cares, and I'd like to think I do too. Most of my friends might agree with me. And I just want to thank you once again. I hope to chat with you all again as your MHA, and I'm certainly willing to learn more, to be better educated, to help you.
Thank you. Daryl.
Thank you very much. Nancy, thank you so much. Madam Moderator and Timekeeper, everybody that gave up their supper hour, really appreciate it. Co-candidates, thank you so much for the respectful campaign so far for the first 2 weeks. Let's hope it continues for the last week. I am a person that my whole life I've been serving others and taking care of others and helping others. And I continue to do that right up to my last breath. The difference in myself as an independent progressive conservative candidate is I don't have a party agenda. I'm not dictated to by a caucus. I don't have to listen to a leader telling me what to do. I have one agenda. That agenda is you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with those remarks, excuse me, we have come to the end of the forum. I would absolutely like to thank you all for your time and also how respectful you were in your discussions. As an old and former politician, I know that that can sometimes be challenging. I wish you all good luck. Like disability, I'm non-political, but I will say on behalf of everyone in the room, people with disabilities across the province, we expect that you will be a voice, that you will be an informed voice. We have long memories and we have strong voices. And before Nancy speaks, I'd like to thank our very intimidating timekeeper, who did a fantastic job. I'd like to now tell people in the audience you can clap now, if you like.
Thanks, everybody. I'm not going to go to the front as I did earlier because I really want to face the candidates in this space. And I don't really have notes, but I really wanted to start out with just a moment to say, I listened to everything that you had to say, and certainly there were some points that really spoke to me. I'm certain that points that spoke to many people in the room, as well as those joining us virtually. So I really want to say thank you. But I heard one of the clearest voices, I guess I heard something from all of you in different moments, was that you all said, I don't know it all. And that's really true, because none of us know it all, right? You only know what you know. And I really appreciated also the common theme that I heard you say, each of you in your own moments said that it's so important to consult with the community. And obviously, many of us in this room, are persons with disabilities professionally involved in this area, some of us not professionally but living it, and some of us doing both. Most of us doing both, I'm going to say. And we really do appreciate that opportunity for you to recognize the need to really consult with the community. But beyond that, we really also want you to recognize that it's not just the consultation, it's the opportunity to recognize the authentic voice that you're hearing, to take that, and again, I've heard you respond to that, but we in this space really want to bring forward the importance of that. We've got our opportunity. This is our moment to say, it's not just hearing us, it's actually using what you're hearing and recognizing the importance of that. So that's been really important for me, and I think I'm not alone in that space. I want to also say a big thank you, and obviously a huge thank you to Marie, and again, applause from the audience, I'm sure. But I'm so appreciative of Marie's ability to come in and do this with us. Marie is representative of our community in many ways, and it's been really important for us. I want to also say, just a reminder, that we are that 30% plus of the demographic of this province today. And that's an ever-growing demographic, and anybody can join it at any moment. You know, most of us actually acquire disabilities, not always as an older person, but sometimes as an older